Hi, this is Adam Taylor for AE-TUTS Plus. Welcome to the first part of my two-part tutorial showing how I created a diver's head-up display. All the elements I'm showing can be used for a variety of purposes. I've used variations on these techniques to create a night vision scope and also a pilot's helmet view. Originally it was broadcast in May last year. It was used to generate interest in the launch of a new military toy figure range that we were bringing out. Part 1 will concentrate on creating the graphical elements for the display and also creating the diver's mask. In Part 2 we'll add the air bubbles from the diver's regulator and then complete the project by adding the head-up display readouts. First, in Adobe Illustrator I'll show how easy it is to create etched crosshairs as seen through a rifle scope. So, on with the project. Create a new Illustrator project. I'm using the video film presets and selecting PAL widescreen. Call the project Reticules and hit OK. Then I center the rulers by clicking and dragging from the top left corner of the page down to the cross at the center of the screen. This lets me ensure all my elements are lined up in the center of the project file, and it'll make repositioning them in After Effects a whole lot easier. We need to name the layer. I'm going to call it Crosshairs. Hit OK. Select the line tool and click once on the page. Enter a length of 300 pixels, an angle of 0 degrees, and check the fill line box. Hit OK. Copy and paste further 3 copies of this line. Usually they'll find they stack up on top of each other, so just move them apart so you can see what you're doing. Use the selection tool, click on the first line, and then in the control bar across the top of the screen enter a value of 0 in both the X and Y coordinate tabs. If you don't see this control bar, use the menu window and then select Control to switch it on. Select the next line, click on the stroke command, select dashed line and add values of 1 point dash and 13 points for the gap, giving it a weight of 6 points. This will create a series of short vertical bars instead of a long horizontal one. Set the X and Y values to 0. And the vertical lines will now sit directly on top of the first solid line. Select the third line, click on the stroke command and enter a weight of 3. Select dashed line, enter 0.3 for the dash, 4.7 for the gap. The result of this is a larger number of finer lines. Again, we set the X and Y values to 0. The final line also needs a stroke effect applying. For this we'll keep the weight at 3, but we're going to add a dash of 75, a gap of 150 and another dash of 75. This gives us a thicker detail for each end of the line. 0 the X and Y as before. Then use the selection tool to click and drag a selection box around all the lines. Group them together using Object Group. Copy and paste the group. Set the X and Y coordinates to 0. Then click the Rotate tool and enter a value of 90 degrees. There you have a finished Crosshairs reticule. Okay, now we click on the new layer icon and name the new layer Horizon Meter. Switch off the crosshairs visibility because we no longer need to see that layer. Select the rectangle tool, ensure that the fill box in the colour palette is set to no fill. Then holding down the Alt key, position the cursor over the centre marker and release when the icon changes to show a square around the cursor. This lets you create a rectangle centred on that point. Enter dimensions of width 194 and height 15. Then using the line tool, create a line 194 pixels long, then copy and paste that line. Zero the X and Y axis for the rectangle. Using the selection tool, pick one of the lines, click on stroke, give it a weight of 6 points, a dashed line with 1 point dash and 13 point gap. Hitting the tab key will jump to the next box, clearing it of any leftover numbers from the previous job. Now select the second line, hit stroke, give this one a weight of 5, a 2 point dash and a 26 point gap. Now with these lines I'm just going to zero the x-axis, and then I'll use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move them up and down until they're positioned on the insides of the rectangle, protruding from the top and bottom. Then we're going to use the text tool, so click and drag a rectangle below the horizon meter and slightly larger than the box itself. Pick your font. I've got Myriad Pro selected. You need to enter numbers, which we're going to use for the scale on the meter. So you want 180 space, 135 space, 090 space, 045 space, 000 space, 045 space, 090 space, 135 space, 180. Then click and highlight all those numbers, and ensuring that you've got the paragraphs tab open, select the Justify All Lines button, which is situated at the top right of that window. Now you can use your selection tool to move the sides of the text box so that you can align the numbers better with the meter. That's all we need to do on this layer. So create a new layer, name it Horizon Pointer, and here we're going to create the moving element that will let us animate the meter. Use the line tool, click on the page and enter a line length of 5 pixels. I've done something wrong here. Let's check the stroke. I can see it. I've not got any colour on the stroke, so we need to add black to the stroke, remove the fill colour, and then I'll put a weight of 18 for this line. Right, I'm going to reposition the line in the centre of the meter just to see how it fits. And I don't like it. I think it needs increasing to 22. That looks better. Moving on, switch off visibility for the last 2 layers. Create a new layer, call it Horizon Base. Use the rectangle tool again, holding Alt whilst moving the cursor to the centre of the page. Click the rectangle and add a width of 198 and a height of 34. Change the stroke width to 2. Add a dashed line with a dash of 3 and a gap of 6. And I think we'll lower the width down to 1 because I think it's a bit too thick. That's all you need for that layer, so we'll create a new layer and call this one Horizon Meter. And I've just realised I've named this layer, I've named the earlier layers wrong. So I'll just go back and rename them. Compass Pointer and Compass Meter. This is kind of important because the layer names carry over into After Effects, and it will make it a lot easier to find the layers that you need to work on. Right, back onto the Horizon Meter layer. We need to add an identical rectangle to the previous one. The only difference being this rectangle we're switching off the dashed line. Then using the line tool, I'm going to add some detailing simply by clicking and dragging between points. I want to create a central vertical line, a couple of horizontal lines and 4 diagonals. Essentially, we're creating a stylized artificial horizon, such as those a pilot might expect to have in his instrumentation. Once you're happy, save your project and switch over to After Effects. Okay, in After Effects, create a new project. I'm going to call this one Diver Mask Tute. Then I'm going to import some elements that I've already prepared in Final Cut. Navy Teaser Video is a single video clip containing 4 previously edited shots. We don't need individual shots for this project, so this combined clip's sufficient. Select it and hit OK. Then you want to hit the File and Import File. This time you want to select the reticules.ai file. Using the Import As drop-down menu, select Composition. This ensures all the individual layers are available to us in After Effects. Drag the Navy Teaser Video down to the Create New Comp icon, and then rename the newly created comp Final. Click the Add Folder icon and name this Pre-Comps. I'll use this to hold all the little pre-comps that we'll create during the project, and it'll just help keep the project window a bit more manageable. To rename a file or layer, you simply select the file or the layer, hit the return key to highlight it, type in your name and finish by hitting return again. Double-click Final to open the comp, and in the timeline select the Navy Teaser Video and duplicate it, which on my Mac is Command D. Rename the layers Video Dry and Video Wet, mainly because one's going to be above water and one's going to be below water. Switch off Video Dry's visibility icon and then select Video Wet. Then we're going to add Effect, Colour Correction, Tint. In the parameters, set the Map Black to by clicking in its colour swatch and entering RGB values of 122, 145 and 162. Then set the Map White to and select a black. This will give us a bluey grey negative image. Then add Effect, Noise and Grain, add Grain. Switch the viewing mode to Final Output. Select the preset Kodak Vision 800T, and that just adds some nice noise to the image. Next we need to add an adjustment layer, so hit Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. Drag this layer below the Video Dry layer and rename it Blue Adjustment. Then add Effect, Colour Correction, Hue and Saturation. Click the Colorize option, enter a hue of 174, a saturation of 60 and a lightness of -5. Now we have a nice ghostly cyan negative image which will work well for an underwater image enhancement. Select the Video Dry layer and switch its visibility back on, then move to around about 1 second 8 frames on the timeline, and using the pen tool draw a rectangular mask around the bottom half of the image. By clicking and dragging at various places across the top of the mask you can actually create Bezier curves which can give you a much more curvaceous, organic looking line. Once you've connected up the mask, we need to open up the mask properties, switch the mask from Add to Subtract, and then we need to increase the mask feather properties to around about 85 pixels. Then using the Convert Vertex tool, which you find nested under the pen tool, begin to push and pull the Bezier handles around to create a nice organic waterline transition. And once you're happy with the line and that it matches up with the water, click the Mask Path stopwatch to create a keyframe. Move around the timeline, altering the mask path's shape and position so that you end up with a transition that moves up from the bottom of the screen to the top, which has a nice organic shape that roughly corresponds to the waterline rising as the diver goes underwater. Once you add a keyframe, any further changes to the mask path will now automatically create keyframes. Now with your cursor on the frame where the mask fills the screen and the transition is finished, select the video dry layer and hit Alt square right bracket. This will trim the out point of that layer. Now create a new solid, which is Layer New Solid, name it Visor Black and hit OK. Select the pen tool and begin to add points to create the basic outline of the diver's mask. Set the mask properties to subtract to allow you to see through the solid rather than around it. Personally, I prefer to add straight points to the basic outline, then use the Convert Vertex tool to manipulate the Bezier handles to pull the shape into a curvier diver mask. To see your window at full screen resolution, hit the tilde key. This works in any active panel within After Effects. Hit tilde again to return to your previous layout. You're not really going to want to watch me drawing this whole mask, so I'll jump ahead and we'll come back when I've finished it. Okay, now the outline's looking pretty good. I'm going to open the mask properties and set a mask feather to 3, just to add a touch of softness to the edge. Then we select and duplicate the visor black layer, and of the two visor layers, select the lower of these two, hit Layer, Solid Settings, and then rename it Visor Shadow. Click on the colour swatch and choose a dark grey, and hit OK. Open the mask properties on the visor grey layer and set the feather to 2 and the mask expansion to -7. Now that just gives us a little extra detail to the inner edge of the visor, kind of like a bit of light just catching the edge of the rubber mask. Okay, we need a new layer, which is Layer New Solid. Make it black and name it Glass Edge Stroke. Drag this layer below the two visor layers, and then using the pen tool you want to draw a simple 4-point line so that the two verticals diverge slightly at the top as shown here. Then we add effect, generate stroke, set the RGB values to 207, 207, 207, which gives us a nice off-white colour. Put a brush size of 7 and a brush hardness of 0. Next, add Layer New Layer Adjustment, drag it below the Glass Edge Stroke layer and name it Glass Edge Distort. Add Effect Distort Displacement Map and set the displacement map parameters so that displacement map is Glass Edge Stroke, horizontal is set to alpha, maximum horizontal is 0, vertical is set to green, and the maximum displacement in vertical is 10. And as you can see, all that happens is the entire video image moves up and it's not quite what we expected. To achieve that kind of distortion, what we need to do is select the Glass Edge Stroke layer, hit Layer, Pre-Compose, select Move All Attributes into New Composition and hit OK. Switch off visibility on the Glass Edge Stroke comp because we don't need to see it anymore. The displacement effect will now see the pre-comped layer as a single layer of video and will now behave correctly, giving a nice crease distortion where I want the glass to bend around the diver's face, driven by the stroke that we created earlier. Next we need to distort the image at the sides of the mask in much the same way that glass bends light when it's looked through at an angle. So we'll add a Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll drag the layer so it's below the Glass Edge Distort layer. We'll name it Visor Warp. we'll add Effect, Distort, Mesh Warp, and set the Mesh Warp parameters to 1 row. And then, to help me visualise the shape of the glass, I'll switch the glass edge stroke comp visibility on, and then by clicking and dragging on any intersection point on the mesh warp, I can move that vertex around and play with the Bezier handles if I wanted to. Now I want to subtly distort the mesh to feel as if it's wrapping around my face, so I'll just pull it around until it works for me. Now that I'm happy with the warp, I'll switch visibility off for the glass edge stroke comp. To see what effect the mesh warp is having, you just need to switch its visibility on and off a few times. It's very subtle, but it's enough to fool the eye and to think it's looking through glass. The last section of part 1 is to add some water droplets to the outside of the glass visor. To do this, we create a new comp by clicking on the new comp icon, call it droplet, and give it a width and a height of 100 each, and hit OK. Grab the pen tool and start to click and drag points to create a watery blob shape. Don't fill the frame, as you'll need some room for the emboss effect. Then we add the layer styles, bevel and emboss. Open the bevel and emboss parameters and set the style to emboss, the depth to 70. The size to 36, angle to 144, and altitude to 70. In the project window, drag the droplet comp onto the Create New Comp icon, select the comp which has now been created called Droplet 2, hit Composition Settings, choose the PAL D1DV widescreen preset, and change the comp's name to Mask Water Drops. Clean up the project window by dragging the pre-comps that we've created into the pre-comps folder. Okay, we need to add layer, new solid, then add effect, simulation, foam. In the foam parameters, we'll set the view to rendered, producer point to 360 by 760, producer X we'll put to 0.45 and producer Y to 0.05 and a production rate of 45. I'll give a bubble size of 1, variance I'll put to 1.12, physics initial speed 4.5, wind speed we'll put to 0, wind direction will change to 3, turbulence 2, repulsion to 0.11, viscosity 0.02 and stickiness of 4. Open rendering and set bubble texture to user defined. The bubble texture layer choose droplet and the bubble orientation set to bubble velocity. Now move your cursor a second into the comp so you can see the bubbles. Go back to the foam production rate, click and drag on the value and just start dragging it around until you can find a nice spread of bubbles that you think would look nice on your glass. We're not needing to animate them, so you just want to find a nice looking bubbly shot. When you find a look that you like, let go of the mouse to retain the production rate. Make a note of the time code on your timeline. Mine's at 1 second 12 frames. Then open the final comp, drag in the comp you've created called Mask Water Drops and place it below the visor warp layer. Move your cursor to the timecode that you noted, i.e. 1 second 12 frames. The bubble pattern should remain the same. Ensuring the Mask Water Drops layer is selected, click Layer, Time, Freeze Frame, and this will freeze your layer at the frame your cursor was positioned. Then add Effect, Colour Correction, Tint, and this just ensures that we've got a grayscale image. Then add Effect, Colour Correction, Levels, and adjust the input black and white levels to increase the contrast in the bubbles, which will give us a better effect on the next section. So now we select the video dry layer and we add Effect, Stylize, CC Glass. Set the surface bump map to Mask Water Drops layer. Set the property to alpha, the softness to 8, the height to 20 and displacement to 180. We're going to use the point light option and give it a height of 100, and I'm just going to manually position the light towards the top of my screen. Now you can brighten the image with the intensity if you want, but I don't. What I do want to do though is change the displacement to negative 180. Mainly because I think it looks more realistic. It's more subtle. It looks more like you've got bubbles on the outside of the glass. And it's less in your face than if we kept the positive number. We want the effect to enhance the shot, not just to become the focus of attention. That's where we finished this first part of the tutorial. Join me for part 2, where we'll add the diver's air bubbles and the data projections inside the visor that give this project its cool techie look. I'm Adam Taylor for AE Tuts Plus. Thanks for watching.